Hi, this is Sarah Meixel with the Pigsty, and today we're online with Dr. Juan Miguel Peralvo. He holds a DVM and a PhD and is a swine nutritionist with Trouw Nutrition. Juan has worked with Trouw Nutrition in the Latin American region for about a year and a half, and his research is focused on pig gut health, specifically gastric ulcers, and he's authored several peer-reviewed articles on this topic. Thanks for being with us today, Juan.
Thank you, Sarah, for inviting me. Happy to be here.
Very good. Let's dive right into our topic, which is gastric ulcers. So let's start out with kind of what are gastric ulcers and how do they affect productivity on a swine operation?
Okay, yeah, that's a very fair question, and sometimes I can say it's a very misunderstood question in relation to gastric ulcers. And to start with that, I would just quickly share my screen so you can, in a very visual way, see what actually are gastric ulcers. So, okay, so to explain what gastric ulcers are, I would like to share first an image of how the stomach of the pig is located in a standing pig. And if we see here, the stomach has this position to the upper part. We can see the entrance of the stomach through the esophagus, and to the bottom, and we can see the exit of the stomach through the duodenum. Gastric ulcers on pigs happen or are located in this area labeled number 4, which is an area which has a different kind of tissue than the rest of the stomach. This area doesn't have the capabilities to secrete mucus, so this area is not protected by the acidity and enzymes present in the gastric content. So when we have a pig on normal circumstances or in the wild, the pig have, due to the feeding pattern of the feed that they receive, they form some layers of pH in the stomach. If we see the layering, we see that close to the bottom, the pH is lower, a difference of the upper part of the upper layers where the pH is slightly higher. So what is the difference in here is that the area number 4, which is called parsophagia, which is a Latin name for a wide area, in the stomach, is very susceptible to low pH and to the enzymatic activity present in the stomach. However, when we feed pigs with pelleted feed or with pelleted feed with a very small particle size, we disrupt this layering and we form a gastric content that is actually very fluid. And the pH actually is buffered, so the pH rises. However, the hydrochloric secretion and the enzymes present in the bottom, due to a very fluid gastric content, are very easy to reach this area, the parsophagia. Therefore, over time, we develop gastric ulcers. Here I have some images that I would like to share with you. Here we have the parsophagia, which is this very wide area. And you see it's very nice, it's shiny. However, when we change the circumstances of the characteristic of the gastric content, we see that this area starts developing some erosions and some keratosis. Keratosis is a normal reaction of epithelial tissue when it's stressed. Here we see that the epithelium thickness, and we see this yellowy staining, which corresponds to the hydrochloric secretion and enzymes present in the secreted from the pancreas and from the liver that are refluxing into the stomach and get in contact with this parsophagia. If the characteristic of the gastric content don't change, we see that over time, pigs develop erosions and they develop ulcers. And here we see a pig with a very severe gastric ulcers. We don't see it here because I rinsed those areas, but actually this ulcer was bleeding when we have the necropsy of this pig. If we at the end change the feed and we are able to solve this problem, we'll see that pigs will develop scars and the parsophagia, which was very shiny, will completely be eroded and will disappear from the stomach. What is a problem here is that when this happens, we also have a narrowing of the esophagus, which is called esophageal stenosis. And this is a problem because pigs are not able to consume the feed normally because the esophagus is now narrowed and a little bit stiffer. So that's basically how gastric ulcers develop and what happen in the stomach of the pigs. But to explain how do we affect the productivity, it's important to take into consideration that on sow farms, around 5% of the student deaths on those farms are related to gastric ulceration. And why? Because in how we feed sows in conventional production, we feed sows restrictively, and we feed them either in 2 times or 1 time per day. So they have longer hours with an empty stomach. So that means that the stomach of the hydrochloric secretion and enzymatic activity in the stomach is constantly affecting the paraesophageal. So around 5%, as I mentioned, of sudden death in sow farms correspond to gastric ulcers. Another important factor is that gastric ulcers in severe cases reduce the average daily growth in growing and finisher pigs because those pigs don't eat properly. So we have 200 grams of loss per day that we cannot gain later on. Another important factor, and it's very important because we're moving towards new consumers, is that there is the perception that gastric ulcers are a problem for animal welfare. So as a producers, we need to take into consideration this aspect because it's not just to produce a lot of meat, it's not just to produce a lot of pork, but to produce this pork responsibly. So that's why taking into consideration gastric ulcers in modern production is a must and it's very important for us. And of course, farmers and companies are working towards solving these problems.
Excellent. What type of swine farms struggle with gastric ulcers?
That's a very nice and important question, Sarah, because there is a big misunderstanding that the gastric ulcer is only a problem on conventional modern farms. However, the research has shown that pigs from free-range farms, from organic farms, they do have gastric ulcers as well. And even there are some reports from wild pigs roaming Europe, roaming America, and also the warthogs roaming Africa. They do develop gastric ulcers because the stomach anatomy is the same. And as I explained, it's not just the characteristics of the feed, but also how do we feed our pigs. So it's present in all around the productions.
Excellent. Is feed then the main factor in producing gastric ulcers?
No, actually no, because there are several factors associated with the development of gastric ulcers. Feed, of course, is one of I would not say important, it's one of the preponderant ones of the more representative in the development of gastric ulcers. However, gastric ulcers also develop due to starvation, as I explained what happened with sows. I will give a quick example. Normally, we remove or we withdraw the feed from pigs before they slaughter, around 12 hours before the slaughter. But if the truck which is moving the pigs to the slaughterhouse just has a problem or is not able to reach the slaughterhouse above 12 hours, pigs to an empty stomach will easily develop gastric ulcers in 42 hours or 24 hours. So that the research is over there. So the feed is not the main factor. Another factor that was part of my PhD project was that pigs which are small, below 1.1 kilograms, have 2.1 times a higher risk to develop gastric ulcers because those pigs usually are low in the hierarchy in the pig pens, and also those pigs are more susceptible because they are more weak at birth, so they don't consume feed immediately. So they also have for longer times of starvation. The reason why they are more prone to develop gastric ulcers.
Very good. And you've talked about this a little bit, but when do pigs usually suffer from gastric ulcers? And again, I know you've talked about this. Are there any other situations that we haven't really covered?
Yes. What we know about gastric ulcers is when we are able to identify them on the slaughterhouse. And actually, it's the veterinarian working in the slaughterhouse who reports that these pigs from this farm have this prevalence of gastric ulcers. But what my research did, we followed days before, we followed actually weeks before, and we found out that pigs at 10 weeks of age, around 70 days of age, they already have gastric ulcers. They have also lesions, not only ulcers, they also have small lesions. And the prevalence that we observed was around 35% of pigs who have some level of lesion in the stomach at 70 days of age. And that was one of the first research that is available, showing that this problem is not just on the finisher pigs, but it's also on the nursery pigs. And why it's important to identify this? Because we are able to first identify when the problem arises, and also which is the strategy that we can use to solve this problem and reduce the prevalence that we will observe in the slaughterhouse.
That's interesting. So you see it in sows. You also see it throughout the lifespan of the pig, essentially.
Yes, but it's important to notice that in this project that I work with on my PhD, we followed the farms over 3 consecutive years, and in every year the prevalence at 70 days of age was completely different. So at the first was 35%, later on was only 12%, and at the end was like 45% of lesions, not ulcer, because ulcer is just a part of ulceration. Also, you have scar and erosion. So it's important to see that gastric ulcer is not just a fixed problem. It's a problem that goes ups and downs, and downs. And it's also related to the management of the farms, because what happened in Europe, what happened in North America, is that there is a lot of automatizations in the farms. So a lot of feeding systems are automatics. And over the weekends, on hours where there is no employees in the farm, sometimes the system just get out of order. They just don't work and don't function well. So when the farmers or the employees arrived next day to the farm, they found out that over 12 hours, any of the pigs were receiving feed because the system was blocked. So that's the reason that in some cases pigs develop gastric ulcers. So when we see gastric ulceration and we just get a screenshot, which is the prevalence measurement, we only see what is happening over there. We're not seeing what is happening before and what will happen in the future. So it's very important to point out that. But also to see that the problem is not just on the finisher pigs, but it's also present before on nursery pigs. And the aim of my research was, so how can we develop strategies on the feed, on the management, and even in the microbiome of those pigs to see how we can prevent the development of these gastric ulcers on pigs.
Very good. And let's talk about that. I mean, what can hog farmers and nutritionists do to really prevent gastric ulcers?
Yes, the first thing that I can say to customers, to hog producers, is that we as a nutritionist every day we're looking ways to prevent the development of gastric ulcers. I mentioned before that gastric ulcers develop due to a small particle size on the feed, but there is a reason for that. We reduce the particle size of the feed because we increase the surface area on which enzymes will be able to interact, so extract more nutrients from the feed. So if we have a large particle size, we just reduce the digestibility of the feed. So nutritionists always try to find the right level to a small particle size, a large particle size, to increase productivity, but also to reduce the risk of developing gastric ulcers. So every day we're working towards solving this problem. However, what farmers can do is monitor their pigs constantly. And when they have mortality, it's important to not only look the reasons in gut and stomach or lungs, they also need to open the stomach and report this to the veterinarian, because it will give us a very important hindsight, see how the feed is performing, not just based on average daily gait, feed conversion ratio, but also on gastric and stomach health in relation to gastric ulcer. The second thing, it's very important to have the personnel trained on farms, well-trained on farms, because as I mentioned, in long periods of starvation or fasting without receiving feed, pigs are very prone to develop gastric ulcers. So a lot of automatization comes with a lot of auditoring, because we need to be behind the system, managing and reviewing that everything is working well. And another important factor is that if we do have a problem, it's important to communicate this problem to the feed mill, because if this is happening with your farm, it's probably happening in other farms. So the problem will not only be present here. So if we report this back, we are able to solve this problem not only for this particular farmer, but all the farmers that are served by this feed company, just in general, mentioning that.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for all the information and time today, Juan.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Always happy to talk about gastric ulcers.
Very good. Thanks for your time. And this is Sarah Mikesell with the Pig Site.